you might be quite human in real life.
I hope so. I very much hope so. But okay. So this is an interview with Ronan Coghlan for the Snuffbox podcast. Gonna be asking him a few questions. I found him after watching a Shiver documentary on the Duraku, which is a giant otter creature from Ireland. And I just messaged him and seen if I could ask him a few questions about his kind of involvement in the cryptozoological world. So um when you were younger, did you have much of an interest in cryptids and folklore? Was there any role models or inspirations that kind of really drove you towards it?
Well, now asking me about when I was younger requires my using great fields of memory because I am at this stage a little past my sell-by date. I'm in solitary confinement here because I'm
Yeah.
regarded as vulnerable. But what do you think of my beard, by the way?
Oh, it's great. I wish I could grow a beard like you.
Yeah, well, uh, you see, my wife has set herself up as my image consultant, and she
Yeah.
advanced on me this morning with a pair of scissors and a determined expression. So I wanted to make sure that it was sort of
Yeah.
photogenic.
Well, this is it. This
Now,
is recording the
let's get back
audience.
to cryptozoology then for
Yeah.
a minute. What got me interested in cryptozoology was I have always been interested in folklore and mythology, but I always wrote these things off as myths, if you like,
Mm.
nothing that actually happened. And
Okay.
then when I was at university, I happened to pick up Bernard Hövellmann's book On the Track of Unknown Animals, which is, I suppose, the Bible of cryptozoology.
Mm.
At once, I was absorbed. In fact, I rather enjoyed reading that more than going to the lecture I was supposed to attend. So I ensconced myself in the library in a little nook where I wasn't well perceived. And that was the start of
Hidden
it
away.
all.
Yeah, and you
Since
read.
then, I have done quite a lot of research into cryptozoology. I'm actually the editor of the American blog
Oh yeah,
of
I forgot to
the
mention that.
Center for Fortean Zoology. You can get that on that sort of thing. Yes,
Yeah,
Facebook.
I'll put a link in the show notes at the end, so
Yes.
people can get to it
But,
easily.
I've always been interested. I
Mm.
have a wide spectrum of imagination, I suppose you'd say. So
Yeah.
I can imagine virtually anything existing, which probably makes me a bit credulous. But even if none of these animals exists, the
Mm.
lore and ideas that have grown up about them are fascinating in themselves.
Mm.
Einstein said that without imagination, the human race would never get anywhere. And he was probably
That's great.
right.
He's
He
very,
didn't
very
remember
right.
anything, mind you, but he was good at the imagination side of
Mm.
things.
I think I share that idea
Obviously,
with you a lot. Yeah.
obviously, yeah, I took a look around Ireland. There are a lot of lakes in Ireland that have various monsters in them,
Mm.
according to legend, not just the Dúfhachu, but there is the Ach Ishka, the
Yeah.
horse of water, which seems to be something like an unknown species of eel, if the truth be
Oh,
told. But
okay.
it's been reported. Well, you see, an eel, if it sticks its head up out of the water, it looks a bit like the head of a horse. Now, I have never
Sure, yeah.
actually managed to get a horse to swim alongside the eel, so I could judge their similarities. But nonetheless, you can see the
You
general
see many too.
configuration and shape. And actually, the lake horse is also believed in both Scotland and Wales. When you come onto the Dúfhachu, though, it's a different matter altogether because they don't suggest that it's any kind of outlandish monster. Basically, it's supposed to look like one whale of an otter, if that isn't making
Yeah.
my metaphor somewhat.
Yeah.
It's supposed to look like a very large otter. But the curious thing is that I've not really been able to trace any reference to the Dúfhachu as monster before about the year 1600.
Yeah.
Now, the word Dúfhachu is also used to mean an otter, but it's pretty obsolete these days because the word Dúfar, meaning water, has
What?
died out in Irish.
Mm.
Anyone who knows Ishka is
Ishka.
doing past his leaving certificate, shall we
Yeah.
say. Dúvar is a literary word, but the Dúvarchu, of course, means the water
Water
hound or the
hound.
water dog.
Mm.
And in the old days, it was certainly applied just to an otter, your ordinary cuddly looking otter that looks so friendly you want to stroke it and then it bites the hand off you. But the thing is, it doesn't look like anything extraordinary.
Yeah.
Uh, but then, at some stage, the belief grew up that there was another animal that looked like an otter, except it was very, very large. And the term duvaku, I would imagine, was dropping out of use for the ordinary otter in those days
Yeah.
and was applied to this creature. The first
Yeah, I get
person
it.
to write about it, its first written reference, was by Roderick O'Flaherty, who lived in County Donegal. Now, you may not realize it, but in Donegal in the old days, the O'Flahertys were regarded as a terrible pack of savages. The
Okay.
people in Galway City used to have a prayer, "Oh God, preserve us from the wrath of the O'Flahertys." But this fellow seems to have been a very civilized sort. He wrote his book in
Yeah.
Latin and then he wrote it in English, and he spoke of this creature, and he called it the Dúvarchu, though in parts of Ireland today it's pronounced the Dúrchu, because I'm sure
Sure.
you're familiar with the fact that BH in Irish
Yeah.
can be V or
Sure.
a W, depending on which neck of the woods you come from.
Yeah.
Anyway, he also calls this the Irish crocodile, which seems to me to indicate that he hadn't much acquaintance with crocodiles, because no way does the crocodile look like an
There's
otter,
no
at
way.
least not any crocodile I've seen. But he may
Yeah.
have been trying to get across the fact that it was as fierce as an otter. And he
Mm.
describes the first Dúvarchu attack. A man was walking by Glenad Lake. Oh, it was a nice, peaceful day. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and out jumped this Dúvarchu and grabbed him by the pate. And in case you're wondering about what a pate is, it isn't anything obscene, it's the
Okay.
head.
Oh,
And he
okay.
started dragging him into the water. Now, this individual didn't really take to being dragged into the water, so he took
I
out
don't think
a
you would.
knife and stabbed the Dúvarchu, which felt rather miffed by this treatment, and it swam off into the
Yeah.
distance. But that's the first thing about the Dúvarchu that people tend to remember.
Yeah.
Now, whether there was lore about the Dúvarchu before or not, I've been unable to trace. If anyone listening to you knows about any earlier
Mm.
stories about the
If
Dúvarchu,
you.
I would be only too pleased to hear about
Mm.
them. But the Dúvarchu figures in the rather tragic legend of Grace Connolly.
I've heard this one.
Now,
Yeah.
back in the old days, it was the custom of people washing clothes to take a basket of clothing to the nearest source of water, stick the clothing in and scrub like be damned, and eventually they got it clean.
Yeah.
Actually, the cost of washing machines, it might be an idea to go back to that system today. A lot of people
What's in the river?
don't get people ringing you up offering to insure your washing machines. That's a side point. Anyway, Grace Connolly's husband is variously referred to as Turlough or Terence, because in those
Terence.
days, if you were Irish, you generally had your Irish name and your English name. Turlough, or as they
Is
pronounce it in Kerry, Trelough, was Englished as Terence. The two names are quite unrelated.
oh, I never
Anyway,
knew that.
Terence was getting fidgety. He was at home waiting for his wife to come in and make the tea, and they didn't have television to occupy them in those days.
Yeah.
And he decided to get in touch with her to find out what delayed her. Now, this, as you will have realized, was long before the invention of the mobile phone. They were more of the nature of sending out drum signals and things
Yeah.
like that.
Smoking.
So he got upon his feet and walked. Down he went to the lake, and a horrifying sight gripped him. There on the lake was what looked like a McDonald's quarter pounder that had been smashed and left tomato sauce all over the place. And sitting on this horrible oleo, devouring it, was the Duvahoo.
Dun, dun, dun.
Well, I can tell you, poor Turlock was taken aback. It's not what you
As it should
expect,
be.
even in the wilds of Connemara where this was going on. He quickly took out his trusty knife, stabbed the horrible beast, and then he thought that was that, but it wasn't. For out from the lake came the mate of the beast. You may have heard it said that the female of the species is more deadlier than the male, and this one certainly was. Turlock didn't wait around anymore. He vaulted on his horse, and he and the horse set off. I don't know which was more scared. And the female Duvahoo set off in pursuit. Eventually he came to a rock and could go no further. The horse couldn't get over it. He jumped off. Out he whipped the knife again. A terrible combat followed. Sorry, my teeth came loose there. A terrible combat followed. He stabbed. He gouged. The Duvahoo bit. It tore. But eventually the human being triumphed. The Duvahoo was no more. Well, he had to get the remains of his poor wife up. Now, in those situations, if I found my wife in a state like that, I'd take along a shovel and a plastic bag. That would be useful. But they didn't have plastic bags in those days.
Yeah.
He got what he could of her up, and I suppose what he couldn't scrape up, he left there. There may be some fossilized scrapings of her there to this
There might still be some there,
yeah. Anyway, he took her home and she was buried in the local graveyard. Now, in the local graveyard, you can find her gravestone, and carved upon it is a mysterious beast, a beast that looks like a mixture of dog and otter, a beast that looks like a beast with attitude. The whole thing is, though, this is a legend, and you have to ask yourself, was the beast carved on her gravestone because the thing actually happened? Or was the beast carved on her gravestone as an ornament, and the legend grew up to explain the ornament? The reason I'm considering the second of these is the legend is found elsewhere. On a beach in Donegal, much the same story is told. And in those days, legends tended to migrate a lot. The storytellers, the Shanakees, would go from one place to another. You see, they didn't have television and those things. I can see you're young and you probably can't envisage television. They had all this sort of thing, and the legends were the things that traveled around.
Yeah.
But the Duvahoo seems to have been known to folklore anyway. And the thing about it is, we have to ask ourselves, is it based on a real animal, or is it based on an idea? We may be about halfway between the two, because I have a suspicion that what happens occasionally is there is a mutant in the otter population that is larger, much larger than the average. And I would think that is what lies behind the legend of the Duvahoo. But the Duvahoo is believed in Scotland as well as in Ireland, and there a confusion has entered in, because in Scotland you get occasional albino otters of ordinary size, but the term Duvahoo is applied to those as well. And between sort of Scottish mentality, Scotch whiskey and Scotch mist and the Duvahoo, they've mixed the two of them up a bit. But it's certainly a known beast in Scottish lore. And I'm not entirely sure you don't get it in England occasionally in sort of places that haven't been dug up and turned into cities yet. But, the thing is that I think there may be some sort of animal behind it, but I think it is a mutant ordinary otter rather than The thing is, if you had a whole population of Dúbharthús frisking and frolicking about,
Yeah.
um, they would have to be noticed because they are these things. But I mean, there have been a few interesting sightings in recent times. If you go across to Achill Island
Oh
for your
yeah.
summer holidays, if you're allowed to
Mm.
travel by then,
Yeah.
which you probably won't be,
Someday, someday.
there is there's an island there called Skerritt's sorry, a lake there called Skerritt's Lake, and several people have seen a strange creature in that they can't identify. The one who got the best view was a cyclist. He was cycling along, and suddenly out of the lake came this beast. He said it was as big as a horse, but he couldn't say what it was. It shot across the road and uh, into the field nearby, and it gave him nearly a heart attack. But he assured his hearers that he'd seen this, and he hasn't been the only one to report this. Whether this is a Dúbharthú or something else, I don't know. Glenad Lake itself is a rather strange place. There are all sorts of legends attached to it. For example, on one occasion, a man was riding on a horse and he saw an unidentified creature that looked like a foal come out
A
of the lake,
foal.
follow him, but it wasn't a foal. It just looked like a foal.
Yeah.
It was a pseudo foal, a fake foal.
A fake
He
foal.
sort
That.
of turned around and growled at the foal. That's one way in Connacht
Yeah.
they have of kind of discouraging in pursuit. He turned around and growled at the foal, and the foal, well, you don't anger a Connacht man who's growling at you, around and return to the lake. But various superstitions have attached themselves to the lake. But the legend of the Dúbharthú is found in quite a lot of lakes. Now, whether the Grace Connolly thing actually happened and the story spread and people started applying it to their local lake or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it does seem to be an unknown creature. I won't say an unknown species, but it's an unknown creature of some kind. Of course,
Lurking about.
there are many other kinds of unknown creatures in Ireland, but
Mm.
this is one of the most pronounced and one that's likely to leave teeth marks in you.
um, do you have a cryptid that would be your favorite that you've focused on a lot when researching and reading and learning?
Well, a lot of cryptids are the kind that you wouldn't call favorites exactly because you wouldn't exactly like to meet them. It's very, it can be very, very stimulating to read about the Congomato of Africa. But as
Okay.
this thing is a thing with a beak with teeth in it and wings like a bat, you wouldn't like
Oh,
to actually
no, I
encounter
don't
it.
think so.
And I'm very interested, though, in the legend of mermaids and mermen. Let us not
Mm.
be sort of
So, I
let
know
us
what you're
be
trying to say.
politically correct in these matters.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But the thing is, the legends of mer people, mer folk, I think we could
Merfolk.
call,
Yeah,
are so widespread, and so many accounts seem to have the ring of authenticity about them.
yeah.
But you wonder what kind of creature is behind the legend. A seal that looks very human-like, that hasn't been identified
So,
yet,
yeah.
perhaps. But the funny thing is, there seem to be a lot of them in the rivers in South Africa. Have
South
you ever
Africa.
been up the Zambezi?
I have. I cannot say I have.
You haven't been up the Zambezi. Well, I tell you, actually, that sounds like a rude expression. He's
Yeah.
up the Zambezi. Yes, but have you been up the Zambezi?
I'm gonna start using that.
But uh, whatever about that, the thing is that it is quite astonishing because the mermaids reported sound like the European type of mermaid rather than an African type. They're
Yeah.
white rather than black, for example, though they're in the folklore of the black
Yeah.
people and of the white people. So that sort of thing is very interesting, and I keep attuned. I've learned how to work a computer. Now, when I say I've learned how to work it, I can switch it
You
on
could turn it
and
on.
switch it off. But I can twiddle it a bit and bring up Facebook, and so I keep my eye on these things. But I
Yeah.
would think, yes, merfolk would if you count them as a cryptid, I would certainly be
It'd be your
interested.
favorite. Yeah.
I'm
Is there?
also interested. Sorry, am I going on too long?
No. Keep going. Anything you want to say, just it's great.
No,
Keep going.
the another thing I have become very interested in is people's account of little folk, from
Oh
leprechauns.
yes.
And the reason is I was sitting having a think, which is about the only thing I'm physically capable of doing at my advanced age. And it suddenly struck me everyone says that the fairies they believed in days agone couldn't have existed. Yet no scientist actually wrote a paper which definitely refuted them.
That's true.
Could there be any truth in the stories? And I therefore wrote a book on it, looking into accounts given by people of, shall we say, anomalous humanoids they had seen.
Yeah.
Little people, larger people with a tendency to vanish into thin air and that kind of thing. And I thought there may be some truth behind it. Now, I confided this to my sister-in-law, who immediately said, I've never heard such nonsense in my life. She actually used the word nonsense. Somebody would
Nonsense.
use another word connected with the bovine race, but she is very careful in her language. And so I actually wrote a book on this with
Yeah.
people's accounts that well, they didn't swear they were true, but they
It
assured me
happened.
they were
Yeah.
true. And that's another element that I've looked into. Just because everybody believes
Yeah.
something cannot be
And
true
and what's the
doesn't
name
mean
of that
it
book?
isn't. That it's called The Fairy Realm.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm gonna
Available
look
on
into that after
Amazon
this.
and other good booksellers and some bad
Yeah.
booksellers too, I've no doubt. But it's available to the general public.
Yeah.
But I've never been one to say something couldn't exist. One of the
Yeah.
troubles with cryptozoology, you look it up in Wikipedia or some other conspectus of knowledge, and they'll say it's a pseudoscience. But by a pseudoscience, they mean not a science at all. Now, I suppose you might call it a pseudoscience if you consider it a branch of zoology. But if you consider it a branch of folklore, it's very much a science. One of the most interesting cryptids to be discovered was the okapi. There's an okapi in Dublin Zoo at present. Now, this was a
Oh,
creature in the legends of the pygmies of Africa, and every scientist said, no, that couldn't exist. And then somebody found one and
found
brought
one.
it back, and they had to swallow what they said.
And what kind of
But
creature is that?
another creature, you know the duck-billed platypus?
I do. Yeah.
Yes, well, it looks a bit strange, you will
Very
admit. Here
strange.
we have an
Yes.
animal with a beak, it has fur, it feeds its own young, but it lays eggs. Well, when one of these was presented to a scientist when it was discovered, he said, an animal like this doesn't exist. It can't exist, he said as he looked at the stuffed platypus. This contradicts all the laws of zoology. And he proceeded to pull it apart to find where the wires were. Of course, though it was in those days a cryptid, the term wasn't used in those days, but that's what it was.
Yeah.
It turned out to be a very real creature. Actually, I remember there was one in the Dublin Zoo many years ago. They're
Really.
peculiar creatures, uh, but you don't get them that often. And watch out for their back legs. Their back legs are
Really.
poisonous. They
Platypus's
look
back
quite
legs are poison.
ugly.
Really.
Mm.
Never knew that. Um. Yeah. I get the next one. It's nowadays, especially when you're talking about the little people and the kind of the fairy folk. Like to
Mm-hmm.
me, it feels like I've been reading about that since I was younger. I'm really interested in that. But it seems that in modern days, the sightings there seems to be no sightings at all. It's as if the kind of
Well, if
legend
you
and
look in
magic is,
my
is kind
book,
of
you will
gone.
find dozens of sightings in modern days.
Mm.
And not only that, but a researcher in Italy has compiled what's called the fairy census, in which he's an academic at the University of Indiana, but he's working on their Italian campus. And he sort of put together a census of people who claim to have seen fairies today. It's on the internet. If you look at the fairy census, you'll find it.
You find it?
Some of the accounts I'd be a little wary of, shall we say.
Yeah.
People who are returning home from the local hostelry late at night might well see fairies and many another thing, but actually he tends to exclude such testimony. Down-to-earth, sober people are the type he goes for.
Yeah.
So you cannot just dismiss something because it seems incredible. I'll give you an example. Have you heard of Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction writer? He died
I heard the name. I've heard the name, actually, yeah.
Yes, well, he was very much a science fiction writer. And he said when he was young, his mother told him that up in the field nearby, there were 4-horned sheep. Now, I don't mean 4 sheep with horns. I mean sheep with horns apiece, or a sheep. Well, anyway, he didn't believe this at all. Such a creature would only turn up in a fairy tale, he said. You can't have, you get those things in picture books. You don't, there aren't such things as sheep with 4 horns. And then he went down to the field and saw them. Now, I actually have seen 4-horned sheep, and they're pretty weird looking. They look as though they're from the planet Anusi, but they do exist. They are an accepted breed.
Are they mutants, or are they just a separate thing?
Sorry?
Are they a mutant, or are they like a separate species of
Oh,
goats
no.
or sheep?
They're a breed of sheep. Sheep. You've got to remember that sheep spring from things that looked a lot more like goats than the woolly sheep you see in many fields these days. And these look, when I saw them, they were much shorter of hair, and they looked a bit like goats, frankly. But they definitely had 4 horns each, and they're not a mutant, no. But such things exist, but they seem impossible. Every one of us has a sort of borderline of the possible. Some people will say, have you ever seen a ghost? No, they're impossible.
Yeah.
They're beyond the borderline of what they can believe in. Let them see a ghost themselves, and they change their borderline. A lot of people don't change their borderlines throughout their lives because they don't look at things enough. They like to sit at home and watch the television, which is mainly what I do myself these days, now that I can think of it, so I shouldn't be chastising anybody else. But no, you've got to be very careful where you put the limit on what you believe might be possible. Now, with regard to fairies, if you go looking for them, you won't necessarily see them, because although they appear to be there, they don't appear to be there all the time. I think they may slip in and out of another dimension. Now, you may think I have reached science fiction here. You may be thinking, this old coot has passed his sell-by date and is thinking of science fictional terms. But actually, physicists these days are considering seriously the possibility of other dimensions. Professor Kaku of the University of New York is particularly vociferous on this, but I think even Stephen Hawking was prepared to admit that there were such things. So you've got to be very careful where you put your limits. Look at quantum physics. Now, I don't understand how quantum physics works.
I have no idea. I can barely understand
math. The whole thing about quantum physics is the things it proposes are things which, when I was young, and that wasn't yesterday, you would have dismissed completely and utterly as science fiction.
It's weird. Speaking on that, the point you had about them going into a different dimension, there's a really good book called The Eighth Tower by John Keel, and it speaks about basically how certain cryptids like Bigfoot and a few others might have an ability to
quite a lot of John Keel's work. Yes, the thing about John Keel, although he does write very interesting books, one wonders sometimes if he uses a little poetic license, because he is a journalist, or he was. He's dead now.
He was.
But he may have sort of spiced up his stories a bit, but
Yeah.
not too much. I mean, he was anxious to tell the truth. But there are quite a lot of these books going about. You have to be careful with them because some of them are written just to bring in the box, as it were, and they
Mm.
write what people want to read or what they think will be exciting.
Yeah.
Like My Grandfather Was an Alien, something like that. But you have to also keep an open mind when you read the more soberly written ones.
Mm. Is
Well, now, does
there
that give you some insight into the varying maze-like structure they call my brain?
a small insight? I think it would take a few years to really pick apart the enigma. Yeah. Um, could I just ask a few questions about the just aside from cryptozoology about
Yeah,
the Shiver documentary?
yeah.
Um, so how did you come around to actually getting onto it? Did they contact you or did they find you
The
through some?
telephone rang one evening.
Hmm. And yeah, that was
"My
it.
name is Zellweger," said a voice on the other end of the phone. This was a man in Montreal, and he said, the Canadian television firm for which I work are doing an international program called Boogeyman. Ah, they want to do a set in Ireland, and we tried to find someone who knew anything about monsters, and a Dublin journalist said you were the monster person to go to.
Hmm.
I didn't quite know whether that meant I was conceived as monstrous or knowledgeable in monsters, but
Maybe both.
at any rate, what do you mean, maybe both? Not the least monstrous about me. Anyway, to carry on. So in due course, we decided the place to go was Omey Island, where a painter had seen one of these creatures
Hmm.
not long before and had actually put on the internet a picture of the creature. You probably have seen it. It
Yeah,
shows
it's
a
the
beaver
most
who
famous one, I
rises
think.
up out of the water. So we went down to Omey Island, and Omey Island is actually only a part-time island. They have such things in Connemara. There are a
Okay.
lot of strange things in Connemara. But the thing is, you can actually walk to it when the tide is out. But woe
Okay.
betide you if you wait too long. The tide comes in and the murky water surrounds you. Well,
Swallows you up.
we did quite a lot of filming about the place, and I watched in the dark to see if anything would come up, and it didn't. But I mean, one wonders sometimes if it sort of senses that it's being watched. I
It's
don't
being
know.
looked for.
But
Hmm.
waters, like all waters in twilight or the dark, look menacingly as though they may conceal unknown and untold creatures lurking in their innermost depths. Now, my idea was to throw one of the cameramen in and see if anyone, anything would come to the top to eat him. But this did
Yeah.
not go down terribly well.
I don't think. No, I don't think so.
Finally, on my last day there, we were filming at the very dawn. And when we had filmed, we returned from Omey Island and had breakfast in the hotel. But I had to leave breakfast early because I had to catch the bus for Galway. So I
Okay.
said to the French speaking crew, they were French Canadians, there's a custom in Ireland that when you leave a restaurant, you pinch the waitress. So be sure you do that before you go. And then I took the bus.
Did you find out if he pinched the waitress?
I have no idea whether the waitress remained unpinched. I decided it was better to lie low and say nothing for a while.
I
But the
looked.
thing is, these very waters, even if there was nothing in them, once
Hmm.
the imagination gets going, particularly if they're, as they sometimes are on shore islands that are just jutting into the sea, rather murky with sand and mud mixed in, they look as though they could contain something primeval that would
Anything.
suddenly rise up and drive reason from your soul.
That's good.
It was fun filming it.
Yeah,
It
I
would
looked in
great.
the
It would have been even greater fun if the Duvah had eaten one of the
if
cameramen,
he'd eaten one of the
but
yeah.
they
I
were a miserable
I
bunch.
remember watching it and then looking in the comments of it, and I think basically every single comment was about how great they were and how much I think one of them was, I want to follow this man around the field while he talks about all the different creatures that are roaming about Ireland, which would be a very interesting day. But
Well, people can't follow me around here because of social distancing.
definitely, but there's definitely a demand for
Oh,
more
yes,
content from you.
there is certainly. Uh, you might like to recommend my dictionary of cryptozoology,
I
which is
will
also available on,
on
and quite a
Amazon.
lot of other books.
I
Yes,
think I might
but
pick it up after this actually, just
mm,
so I haven't
well,
read much on cryptozoology in the terms of that kind of sense.
tell me how many of your, I was going to say customers, but listeners actually would have an interest in cryptozoology and things of that nature.
Well, I don't have a very big listener base, but I post my episodes around kind of on different internet forums, and I'll definitely going to post them into some cryptid forums where people would be there specifically for cryptozoology. So I think I'd get a lot of people that would be interested in it. So I'll put all the links
Oh,
to all
that's
your books
yes.
in the description.
Spread the word.
Spread the word of your greatness. Do you have any future documentaries planned or any future content or books coming up?
Well, when you reach 71, which is my age, I'm nearly 72. Can you believe that? And I'm getting increasingly
You
decrepit.
don't look it. You look
But that's
24.
only the outside. It's the inside you've got to watch. Decay, dissolution,
Rot.
strange. Do you ever have the impression that strange vermiform creatures are crawling about inside you,
I,
eating your very innards?
I cannot say that I do.
Just wait till you reach my age.
Then maybe
Just
I'll
wait till
see.
you reach my age. It's all waiting there for you. Um, no, cryptozoology can be very absorbing, but when you read cryptozoological accounts, there is just one thing: always use caution, because most of these result from anecdotal evidence or sort of misty
Mm,
photographic evidence, and you've got to use your critical faculty as well.
mm,
While we'd all quite like to have monsters gallivanting around us, as long as they don't gallivant too near
you
and devour us,
stay away.
nonetheless, I would suggest that anyone trying cryptozoology should be particularly careful of small paperbacks because they very
Okay.
often are written.
Written quickly and pumped out very fast, kind of way. Hello? Oh, I think we might be lagging. I think it might. Oh,
Are the aliens fouling your
oh, sorry.
communication?
Yeah, I think they're on top of the roof right now, picking at the antenna. No, it's back now. I can see you again. I just have one more question before we finish up that I forgot to ask earlier that I'm actually interested in is when you were younger or throughout your life, have you ever had any experiences with cryptids? Have you ever had any sightings or?
Well, I'll tell you, I have never had a sighting of anything anomalous. I have never had an experience of anything
Hmm.
anomalous, except for the time I was teaching at a school in Belfast. I looked at the crowd and I said, God, now this was a very inner city school in
Mm,
Belfast. And
mm.
I looked at the pupils and I thought, and they say cryptids are fictitious. Look at this lot.
That's
Now
very
there
mean.
you got your primeval fear, something that hadn't quite evolved opposable thumbs, that kind of thing.
That kind of thing, yes.
But no, I've never had any real esoteric experiences.
So I'm the same. That's all my questions. So that was very good. Thank you so much for doing that. Maybe once this finishes or in a year or two, we could I could do a one-on-one interview with you in a cafe or in a field, or walk around a field or something.
I prefer cafe to
A
field.
cafe. Yeah, I think I would too. But